Roman legions, the most feared fighting force in the ancient world, changed the way warfare was done forever. But what made them so successful? Was it their tactics, their discipline, or their weapons? In this video, we will look at the structure of the Roman legion, see how they used their weapons, and test out their famous testudo formation to find out if it really worked. So the Roman legion was a huge force composed of highly trained soldiers who followed orders without question. It's believed that around 5,000 men strong, each legion was divided into 10 cohorts, which is basically like groups within a group. Each cohort had around 480 men split into 6 centuries, which are further divisions within those groups. And each century was led by a centurion, a non-commissioned officer who held the rank of captain in today's army. The centurions were responsible for training the soldiers under them and making sure they were ready to fight. Now you might be wondering, why didn't Rome use some kind of ranking system? Well, unlike the Greeks, Romans didn't have ranks or titles for their soldiers based on their origin or social status. This meant that there was no distinction between a rich landowner and a poor farmer who enlisted in the army. All that mattered was the position you held in the unit, whether you were a centurion, a soldier, or anything in between. That's because in the Roman army, advancement was based on merit and performance, not on who your family was. So a poor farmer could rise through the ranks and become a centurion, all based on his bravery and skill in battle. However, don't get too excited, because climbing the social ladder in Rome wasn't easy. It took years of dedication and hard work to move up in the army. In fact, it was said that many soldiers spent their entire careers as privates and never achieved a higher rank. In the early days, the Roman army was mostly made up of volunteers, but as Rome grew, so did the need for a larger military force. So eventually they started to draft soldiers from their provinces, kind of like how the USA does now. But still, even though these soldiers came from different places and had different backgrounds, they were all united under one banner and one set of rules. And let me tell you, those rules were not for the faint of heart. Soldiers in the Roman army had to be tough both physically and mentally. They had to be able to endure long periods without food or water, sleep in uncomfortable conditions, and fight against enemies who often outnumbered them. And if they weren't able to handle the pressure, they were out. There was no room for quitters in the Roman army. It was a true test of character, and only the strongest and most determined soldiers were able to make it to the top. The Roman legion was also highly adaptable, which allowed them to fight in different environments and against various enemies. They were able to take on larger and stronger opponents and defeat them thanks to their skills and strategies. One of the key factors that made the Roman army so successful was its adaptability. And like other armies of the time, such as the Greek phalanx, whose tactics and formations were set in stone, the Romans were able to change their formations and strategies depending on the situation. For example, when facing a numerically superior enemy, the Romans would form a tortoise formation to protect themselves while they hurled their javelins. And after the javelins had done their job, they would reform into a normal battle line. This flexibility allowed them to hold their ground against much larger armies and often catch their opponents off guard. Another reason for the Roman army's success was the use of the gladius, a short sword designed for quick, precise strikes in close quarters combat. The gladius was perfect for fighting in the dense formations common in ancient warfare, allowing Roman soldiers to effectively engage multiple enemies without getting overwhelmed. Meanwhile, the Greek phalanx relied on the long spear, which was great for creating a wall of sharp metal points that could decimate an attacking force. But it was less effective in close combat. This gave the Romans a significant advantage in battles where the fighting became close and personal, which was pretty often. Overall, the Roman army's ability to adapt to different situations and its effective use of weapons like the gladius made it a formidable force that could take on and defeat a variety of enemies. And speaking of weapons, let's talk about the famous Roman shield, the scutum. The scutum was a large, sturdy shield that acted as a barrier between the soldier and the outside world. But what really made the scutum special was its unique shape. It was curved on the top and bottom to deflect blows and arrows, making it much more effective than the flat shields used by other armies. Plus, The shield boss, the raised knob in the middle, added an extra layer of protection against sword slashes. When the soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder in a tight formation, their shields formed an almost impenetrable wall of wood and leather that could withstand a barrage of arrows or spears. Talk about a shield wall. But the scudam wasn't just for defense. It also played a big role in the famous testudo formation. The testudo formation was a defensive tactic used by Roman soldiers that involved interlocking their shields in a way that created a protective shell-like structure. When executed correctly, this formation made the soldiers essentially bulletproof. To form a testudo, the soldiers would raise their shields and then drop them down in front of them, locking shields with their neighbors, creating a solid wall of wood and leather. Then they would duck under the cover of their shields and voila, you've got yourself a turtle. This formation was particularly effective against cavalry charges because the tightly packed shields made it difficult for spears and arrows to penetrate. Also, since the soldiers were protected from incoming projectiles, they could hurl their javelins freely, inflicting casualties on the enemy before they got close enough to do any damage. This gave the Romans a huge advantage in battle and helped them defeat many enemies who underestimated their power. Now let's test out the testudo formation and see if it really works. We Raygon now use pool noodles to represent the Roman shields and try to break through the formation with our javelins. As you can see, it is pretty hard to get a spear or arrow through the tight formation because the shields are interlocking. And even if you do manage to get one through, the soldiers can duck under their shields to avoid getting hit. It's actually pretty safe inside the testudo formation. Now let's test out the effectiveness of the gladius against the Greek xiphos. First up, we'll see how long it takes to pierce the xiphos with the gladius. So the xiphos has a wooden shield and as you can see, it takes quite a bit of force to push the gladius through. Now let's see if the gladius can pierce the Roman armor. So the armor is made of leather and metal and as you can see, the gladius is having a hard time penetrating it. The combination of the tough armor and the gladius's short, stubby design makes for a pretty evenly matched matchup. The gladiuses were mainly used for thrusting and slashing attacks in close quarters combat. Its short length and narrow blade made it easy to maneuver and strike quickly, which was ideal for the dense formations typical of ancient warfare. Meanwhile, the xiphos was a longer, slimmer sword that was more suited for cavalry combat and open field battles. The length of the xiphos allowed for greater reach, but it was less effective in close quarters combat due to its narrow blade. Overall, the gladius was a versatile weapon that was perfectly suited for the Roman legion's tactics and strategies. So the Roman legion was a highly trained, disciplined fighting force that was capable of taking on and defeating a variety of enemies. Their tactics and formations were adaptable, and their use of weapons like the gladius and the scudam gave them a significant advantage in battle. You can experience the history for yourself at the Plovdiv Amphitheater, which is the second largest amphitheater in the world and still stands in Bulgaria. What do you think of the Roman legion? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.